Welcome to Redeemed, a podcast by Pastor Wes Gunther of the Cedar Hill Baptist Church in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today. I'm teaching through 10 parts, 10 different lessons on the character of a Christian. So far we've looked at the importance of our speech. Last week we looked at Nehemiah's life in the form of taking initiative, taking action. When the opportunity's there, when we think the Lord's wanting us to do something, to take initiative. Tonight, I'm looking at the third one there, which is taking responsibility. And I'm looking at the life of Moses in particular in this story here in Numbers chapter 16. What does it mean to take responsibility? What does that look like? What's the essence of that? Why is that important? How does that apply to our lives? Those are the things I kind of want to look at here in the time that we have tonight. As we come to Numbers chapter 16, we're in the midst of the wilderness travels of the nation of Israel. And there's been this routine problem of the people coming up against an obstacle and complaining and bickering. Most of the time they turn against Moses and Aaron, complain against them. It kindles God's anger against them. And then there's some type of punishment that ensues because of that. And then because of all that, the people tend to straighten up for a while and follow God for a while before they forget. They seem to forget and fall back into that same cycle. And it seems to be an ongoing cycle if we know our Bibles, not only here in the wilderness time, but as we get into the time of the Judges, it'll be the same type of routine over and over and over again. And so, as we come to number 16, we're right in the midst of one of those events. But I think it's worse this time. In other words, I think their attention is so much shorter, and their response is so much more dulled than in some of the other events. And let me explain what I mean by that. As I read down through the second part of that chapter, and you see God upset because of their complaining and their murmuring and their griping, it mentions at the end how many people were killed in this particular event. It says, besides, or in addition to, those that were killed in the matter of Korah. Well, Korah was the first part of this chapter, which we didn't look at yet. I'm not going to read the 40 verses that encompass that story. Not all of them. We're going to look at some of them. But we just came out of the story of Korah. And Korah had mounted a rebellion against Moses. Korah had complained against much the same things. Why did you bring us out here? You just brought us out here to die. You know, life is hard. It's not easy. We thought we were going to the promised land. We're not in the promised land. Again, that's not Moses' fault. That was the heart of the people's fault. But now they're in the wilderness and they're wandering and they're not in the promised land. And there's this constant thing where they are complaining about would have been better to stay in Egypt. Things were better in Egypt. We had a routine in Egypt. We had a house and food in Egypt. Yes, we were slaves. Yes, we were not in God's promised land. Yes, the fullness of God's blessing was not available to us, but we liked it. It was fine. Compared to what we're in now, we wish we would have just stayed there. That becomes a routine complaint, and Korah is mounting those same complaints. And he's looking at mounting this rebellion against Moses. He wants to get rid of Moses and Aaron. He wants to take leadership himself. Verse number 12. So I'm in chapter 16, verse 12. Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey?" Interesting definition they use there. We'll get back to that. "To kill us in the wilderness, except thou makest thyself altogether a prince over us. Moreover, thou hast not brought us into the land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of the fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." And Moses was very wroth, and said unto the Lord, "Respect not thou their offering. I have not taken one ass or donkey from them, neither have I hurt one of them. And Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron, tomorrow. Gather yourselves together tomorrow. Take every man his censer, and put incense in them. Bring ye before the Lord every man his censer, 250 censers. Thou also and Aaron, each of you his censer. They took every man his censer, they put fire in, they laid incense thereon. They stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. That should be a frightening thing. Verse 20, the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell upon their faces, and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all the flesh, shall one man sin? Wilt thou be wroth with all this congregation? And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the congregation, saying, Get you up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. And they gat up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of the tents, their wives, their sons, their little children. And Moses said, Hereby ye shall know the Lord has sent me to do these works, for I have not done them of my own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open up her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, then they go down quick into the pit. Then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as he made an end of speaking all these words, the ground clave asunder that was under them. And the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, their houses, all the men that appertained to Korah, all their goods, they and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit. And the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. Let's stop right there. That's the story of Korah. Korah rebelled. Korah accused Moses of setting himself up as prince, as if he's their king and their overseer. And he's rebelling against them and wants to change the authority. They're complaining. Isn't it interesting? They called Egypt the land that flowed of milk and honey. That wasn't the land that flowed with milk and honey. And they knew they were heading towards the land that flowed with milk and honey. Their own spies had said that. Even the spies that were the 10 that they listened to that didn't want to go into the land agreed that it was a fertile land and a lush land and a land of abundance. They made the land look really good. They were just scared of the giants and the walled cities. So they didn't go in. So now these who are usurping the authority of Moses, or who are trying to undercut the authority of Moses, said, you're vaulting yourself up to be more than you're supposed to be. You haven't taken us to the land that we're supposed to go to. Again, separate story. We know why that happened. And so they're rebelling against him. And God says, down in verse number 21, separate yourselves. He says to Moses and Aaron, separate yourselves from them. I'm getting rid of these people. And Moses goes on their behalf and says, it's really just the sin of one man. Please, God, be merciful to the multitude and spare them. It's just the sin of the one guy. I was in 5th grade, my first year that we lived in Pennsylvania. My parents had been in Baltimore up through 4th grade. My mom was my teacher in 4th grade. We moved to Pennsylvania in 5th grade, and I began to attend Mountain View Christian School. Mountain View in 5th grade had a male teacher, and they called him the Bear, and he was kind of gruff. And for a 5th grade student, he was a lot. And I was very intimidated by him. I was a very shy, quiet, bashful, scared little kid. I was. That was kind of who I was when I was a kid. And this guy terrified me. And I didn't want to go to school, and I didn't like him. He was notorious for this, right? One kid acts up, nobody's having recess. One kid misbehaves, all of you are going to write 100 times, I will not misbehave in 5th grade or whatever. And I'd sit there and go, this is so unfair. I didn't say a word. I behaved myself. Moses is making that case to God. There are times that the congregation as a whole will complain. But in this particular one, and we're going to see it in a minute, but Moses goes before God and says, it's just Korah. It's just his group. It's just him and his associates. And God says, all right, tell everybody to get away from Korah and his group and his associates. And Moses does that. In the midst of all that, you see where they took the incense. All 250 leaders within the congregation had taken incense as God is being beckoned, as they're trying to see what God's going to do in this situation. They separate themselves from Korah and his followers. Moses makes that statement, listen, if these guys end up dying just a natural death, then you'll know that God wasn't using me. God hadn't appointed me. But if they die right now, if the ground claves under them, then you'll know that God's given me the authority to lead in the direction that we're leading. And before he's done speaking, or by the time he's done speaking, the ground opens up under Korah and his followers and his family and their stuff, and down they go. Wouldn't that scare you straight? Wouldn't that wouldn't that have an impact? I don't know if I could sleep that night if I had just seen that. I think that would just scare me to death. And I'd be like, Moses, sir, yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir, yes, sir. Obviously, you have God, on a short call. I will behave myself. Verse 41, where we started reading. Verse 41, the first four words. But on the morrow. The morrow? The next day? The next day, they complain. The next day, the ones not swallowed up go and complain against Moses. Wouldn't you have the fear of not? I would imagine that if I went to Moses and complained, the ground's going to swallow me up. Why would you do that? They're so self-centered, so self-motivated, so angered by all of this that they go to Moses and complain. On the next day, it says, all the congregation of the children of Israel, the rest of them, the one that Moses just stood up for in verse 22, right? Moses had just said, Lord, it's not all their fault, it's just him. And within 24 hours, they're complaining. The rest of them, who didn't get swallowed up the day before, they come and complain. And God says, verse 44, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, get you up from among the congregation, that I may consume them as in a moment. It's very similar to what he said in verse 21, right? The day before. Separate yourselves from the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. He says it again the next day. It's as if, and please understand, I'm not trying to put words in God's mouth by no means, but it's as if God said, I tried to do this yesterday, and I waited. Now let's finish the job. Let's be done with them. But once again, what does Moses do? He puts his life on the line for these people. Once again, he does that. Get you up from among the congregation, verse 45, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. And Moses said unto Aaron, take the censer. Remember the one we had just yesterday. Put fire therein from the altar. Put on incense. Go quickly unto the congregation. Make atonement for them, for there is wrath gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun. He didn't even continue praying to the Lord. He didn't beg God on their account this time. But he took action pretty quick. Aaron took as Moses commanded. Aaron was the priest. Aaron was the one that was appointed with the job of running among the people. And he ran into the midst of the congregation. Behold, the plague was begun among the people. He put on incense and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living. And the plague was stayed. Verse 48, such a powerful verse. I think it's a picture of so many applications to what God expects of us. God will say later in the prophets, I searched for a man among them that would make up the hedge, that would stand in the gap. And then he said very sadly, but I found none. I think on this day, they found the man, Aaron. Aaron had the job of taking the incense and taking the embers there from the fire that was burning on the altar, and he ran out among the people, and he stood between the dead and the living. And God honored that and stopped the plague. I think we can understand the heart of Moses. It's why I wanted to go back to earlier in chapter 16. Moses had such a close relationship with God that he understood what God wanted, what God desired, what God expected. He understood what made God angry. He understood the things that would satisfy God. Moses understood that better than, I think, maybe anybody that's ever lived since. He really had that heart for God and understood God. Maybe in much the way we see David, the psalmist. Really understanding God. Really have that close relationship. So much so, remember verse 15? Moses is telling God, Lord, don't respect their offerings. He says, their heart's not right. I haven't taken anything from them. Don't honor their offering. He has that type of relationship with God that he's telling God. I think we would agree God knows, but Moses is letting God know that he knows. God says to Moses and Aaron twice in this chapter, get out from among the people. The first time Moses pleads on behalf of the majority of the congregation. And the second time, they go and take incense from the altar and stand, Aaron in particular, stands between the dead and the living and stops the plague. God honors that. I thought these were a great picture of two men in the Bible who took responsibility. And it wasn't their fault. Think about that. It's an admirable thing to take responsibility when it is our fault. I did it. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I said that. I did this. I did that. It is a difficult thing to take responsibility for others when it's not your fault. I don't know about you, but obviously God didn't call me in this situation, or I would have said, okay, sounds good, God, I'm out of here, It'd be easy to say, that's it. We've tried. I tried yesterday. I did my best. You all don't listen. Within 24 hours, you're at my door complaining again. God says, get out. I'm out of here. God said, get out, and Moses said, I'm going to give it one more try. Listen, and if they're going down, I'm going down with them. Think about that. He could have left and saved his own skin. God gave him forewarning on that. But he didn't leave. He went back in to try to stop them, to try to stop the plague, to try to save the people. And this is where I think we see the heart of Moses. It's in verse 49. Because who wrote human-wise. Who wrote the book of Numbers? Moses did. Moses wrote the book of Numbers. Moses has the job of sitting down at the end of the day, the week, whatever his schedule was, and begin to make notes of what happened, things that are going to be contained within the Holy Scriptures. Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he's making notes and writing things down. And again, if it would have been me, and I would have been called upon to try to do something for the people, and I would have thought, hey, let's take some incense and do our best and try to save the people, and we ran out there and the plague was stopped, I would have written verse 49 opposite. I would have wrote, I think we saved 1.4 million people today. Isn't that what we do? That's what we do as Americans for sure, especially as American Christians. 1.4 million people, lives were spared because of my actions today. And Moses writes down, I dare say with tears in his eyes, as he's writing that night on the parchment that he's given and the quill pen that he has, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he writes, they that died in the plague were 14,700, not counting those that died the day before when God opened the earth underneath the homes of Korah and his followers. Moses, as the leader, as the responsible party, was crying over, lamenting over the lives lost. The ones that he couldn't get there. The ones that they weren't quick enough to get out there and try to stop that plague. The ones that weren't obedient and hadn't listened and didn't respect God. And 14,700 died this day, not counting the ones that died the day before. I think Moses is heartbroken over that. So that's the Bible lesson. What does it mean to be responsible? One of my favorite lessons that parallels this in a different way was Daniel, when Daniel's in captivity. Later in his life, he's under the reign of the Medes and the Persians, second half of his life, second part of his career. Daniel begins to pray for the nation of Israel, begins to pray over their sin, begins to pray that God would restore them and bring them back to this same promised land. They were in captivity. He begins to quote from Jeremiah the prophet. And again, I would have said, God, I know the people sinned. I may be the only one righteous, or he's the only one we know of at that time. I may be the only one righteous, but I know they've sinned. I'm praying that they repent and turn their hearts. But Daniel did not say that. Daniel said, we have sinned. We are wrong. I noted that in Nehemiah's prayer last night. Before Nehemiah goes into the king, when he finds out about the city being burnt out, the gates destroyed, Nehemiah said, we have sinned. They took responsibility. They shouldered that responsibility. They took it upon themselves. I think we are so quick, more than ever in our country today. We are a blame society. It's their fault. It's their fault. Look what they did. I can't help it. Not my fault. It's the way I was raised. It's my parents. I got sent to the wrong school. I didn't go to the right college. I married the wrong person. Blame, 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 blame. It seems that God uses people that take responsibility, even if it's not their fault. And I'm telling you, that goes against the very essence of what we think. It goes against the very understanding that we have. We so quick want to say, it's not my fault, I didn't do it. I think it's high time sometimes we take responsibility, that dads take responsibility for their families. that preachers take responsibility for their churches, that parents take responsibility for their kids. Say, Lord, work with them in spite of me. Help them in spite of me. Moses took responsibility for something. I know he's the leader. That's why God had called him. But there were at least twice in this particular chapter that Moses was given an out. He could have saved his own skin. God could have started over. But Moses so deeply loved his people, in spite of their complaining, and in spite of their bickering, and in spite of them turning against him, that he was willing to do what was necessary to save them. That's why I think verse number 48 is such a key verse and should be so applicable to you and me today. Aaron, verse 48, stood between the dead and the living. I know I'm preaching right now, but don't you think that is the duty of the church today in 2025? Who's standing between the dead and the living? Who's standing between the saved and the lost? Who's holding up the warning sign or running out with the incense, as it were, and saying, repent before it's too late. Turn before it's too late. Moses and Aaron took that responsibility upon them. And so I wrote down just a couple things like I did last week. Number one, I think taking responsibility takes some action. Somehow, for Daniel, it was in his prayer closet. And we know the story of Daniel. Daniel didn't decide to all of a sudden start praying. Chapter 6 tells us that he ended up in a lion's den because his prayer life was so consistent and so well known, even by his enemies, that they used it against him. His prayer life. Daniel spent his time on his knees, praying for his country, praying for his people. I think we know the end of the story there. We're going to talk about Daniel at some point here, but while Daniel's praying for his people, God brings the archangel Gabriel to give him an answer to his prayer. That must have been a prayer meeting. It was just him. Well, just him and God. His prayer was answered before he got off his knees. His prayer was answered to a greater extent than he even asked for. Right? Daniel chapter 9, Daniel's praying, God, restore our people to the land. God said, okay, I will. Here's my time frame for the rest of human history. What? Here's the schedule. Here's the time frame. Here's when the people will be restored. Here's when Messiah will come. Here's when Messiah will be cut off, when he'll be killed. Here's when the Antichrist will come. Here's the kingdoms. Here's the time frame. Daniel's like, wow. Just, again, it's not an accident that the wise men in the Christmas story were looking for the Messiah when he would come. They had an idea when he would come. It was outlined for him by Gabriel in Daniel chapter 9. They had some type of a schedule up to that point. We don't know when Jesus is coming again, but they had some type of schedule when he was coming the first time. Things to look for, things to expect. So it wasn't an accident. God answered his prayer in the middle of that prayer meeting. He took some action. His was on his knees. Moses was saving the people. Think of the urgency of the situation. People are dying. People that he has led across the Red Sea and over to Mount Sinai, and they got the law of the Lord, and now they're in the wilderness, and they're supposed to be getting to the promised land. There are people Moses has cared about and watched out for and loved and helped and nurtured and trained and taught, and they're dying. And there's an urgency to go get this. Let's try this. We have nothing else we can do. Let's go try to take some incense and run among the people and see if God will take note of that and stop the plague. And God did. It wasn't by accident. That's why I read the first part of chapter 16. There had already been an outline of this. There had already been some examples of this. There had already been some of these things in place. The conversation had been similar. The incense had been similar. So Moses did what he knew. He knew what he had already been taught, what he had already seen, and he did it and took some action and did something to help prevent the rest of this. There needs to be a willingness to be used. It's not a small thing. Moses didn't sit there and say, boy, I hope God finds somebody to do something. Hope somebody will run out there and help them while he's packing up and leaving. Hope God finds somebody. I think that's our mindset in America today. Hope God calls somebody. Hope God finds somebody. Hope God goes and gets somebody. Hope somebody does that. We've seen two in a row, Nehemiah and tonight Moses. They're like, I guess I better do it. If it's going to get done, now's the time. Number 3, there was a great understanding of God's heart. Right? This was not out of naivety. He wasn't unfamiliar with God, what God's expectations were, what God's heart was. He wasn't unfamiliar with that. And so when he came to this particular problem, he said, I think I know what we can do. I've been through this before. I think I know what'll work here. If Moses was wrong, he would have got swept up in this plague too. God had given him an out, right? Why don't you separate yourself? Because it's going to get ugly. And Moses says, let me try something. Let me try something. Because he knew God. He wasn't freewheeling here. He had a history of this. He understood the heart of God and what God's expectations were. He understood what God was trying to do and the lessons God was trying to teach the people. He's like, I'm going to try. I'm going to try. I think we can compare that, to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul prayed a prayer I cannot imagine praying. Lord, let me be accursed if it'll save my people. Think of that. Lord, I will go and spend eternity in hell if my family will be saved, if my community will be saved. That's a commitment. I think Moses's was like that. Moses, Aaron, you guys got to get out of here. Things are going to get ugly. Moses says, I'm going to try. I'm going to try to save them. Paul, in the New Testament, Lord, if you will, I'll take the place of my people. What? Talking about taking responsibility. Sometimes in leadership, you got to be willing to take the blame. And I talked about the fact that Nehemiah in his prayer, Daniel in his prayer, both of them said, we have sinned. It would be easy, it would make sense if they'd have said, they sinned, right? Look what they did, look what our forefathers did, look at the problem that got us into this. We understand, we will not make the mistakes they made. Lord, they sinned. But both of them said, we have sinned. Maybe things in America would change if the church today would say, Lord, we have sinned. I think we want to say, look at that mess out there. Look what they're doing. They've gotten rid of God. They've kicked God out of schools. They've kicked God out of, they don't believe him. He's out of our textbooks. No wonder they're in the mess they're in. But I think Daniel and Nehemiah both said, will take the blame. They're not going to ask for forgiveness. They don't even understand it. I'll pray on their behalf. We have sinned. It is hard sometimes to take blame for something you didn't do. It's something that I have worked on and done and incorporated into my ministry as a pastor. I'm the pastor of the church. If something's wrong, it's my fault. If something hasn't been communicated properly, it's my fault. I'm not saying people say that. I'm saying I say that. It's my fault. I'm the pastor of the church. I'm responsible for those things. If things aren't being done properly or need to be straightened up or need to be fixed, I think it's my job to fix it or to find a way to get it fixed. I don't throw people under the bus. People come to me and say, Pastor, somebody misspelled this person's name. I go, I'm sorry. Whether or not I wrote it, I'm sorry. I will fix it. I will take care of it. Sometimes things happen that are just, it would be easy to say, well, they must have messed up. I'll talk to that secretary. Since it's my wife, I probably won't. You know what I mean. But regardless of that particular dynamic we have, I'm not throwing people under the bus. I'm not blaming people. We take responsibility. I think that's what leadership is all about. I really think that's what's lacking in our homes today, are dads and fathers who take the responsibility for their family. We're going to church, we're going to behave ourselves, we're going to do the right thing, we're going to act responsibly. Why? Dad said so. Dad said so. If we don't, we face consequences. I'm saddened by those, and we have some in our church today. In this particular era of our church, we have some who, the husband doesn't always come or doesn't want to come, or the wife's the spiritual leader of the home. That's not her job. And we don't like to say that, but God put responsibilities in place. God made the husband responsible for his home. Leadership. That's been consuming my mind over the last couple of months. Why am I here? What is as a Christian today, what is my purpose? And I'm asking that rhetorically for all of us. What is my purpose? What is my job? What is most important? What is my priority? I think men today are quick to tell you, if you ask them, who are you? What do you do? They're going to talk about their job. Their job. When you stand before God someday, He doesn't care how many widgets you sold in your career, Thank you for listening to Redeemed. For more information, you can email us at pastorwesgunther@gmail.com. Thank you.